I'm going to draw you to a couple of passages. If you want to turn to them, that's fine. If you want to kind of mark them, that's fine too. But these passages are going to be the focal point for where we're going to start tonight. The Old Testament books of Kings and Chronicles tell the leadership story of Israel and Judah, and there are repeated references in these books as to how each king did in comparison with his father. The first one appears when we're told Solomon did not follow the Lord completely as David, his father, had done, and that's in 1 Kings 11:6. A short time later, we're told that King Abijah, Jason, correct me if I get that wrong and just yell it at me, committed all the sins his father had done before him, 1 Kings 15:3. On the more positive side, we're told that King Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord as his father David had done, 1 Kings 15:19. And King Ahaziah, just go with me there. I'm a therapist, not a theologian. His reign is summarized by the statement, he did evil in the eyes of the Lord because he followed the ways of his father and mother. That's 1 Kings 22:52. In contrast, King Joram did evil in the eyes of the Lord, but not as his father and mother had done. That's 2 Kings 3:2. So in other words, Joram was bad, but he wasn't as bad as his parents, which is the theme for the next 2 weeks. King Azariah is praised with the statement, he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father had done, and that's 2 Kings 15:3. There are dozens of statements like these in the books of Kings and Chronicles. Sometimes they're intended to be statements of praise, sometimes they're intended to be statements of criticisms, but whether they're positive or negative, what we can draw from that is where you come from matters. Who you watched growing up, the environment that you were raised in matters. And as much as we as adults want to reject that, and as much as we want to feel like that may not be a part of our life, it is absolutely true that it matters. They're all built, though, on a few fundamental assumptions. One, it's natural and it's instinctive to continue what was modeled for us. Two, sometimes that's a good thing and sometimes that's a bad thing. And three, one of the keys to being healthy in your marriage is to understand where you came from and to understand how to improve on that. And that takes us to what we're going to talk about tonight. Tonight we are focusing on exploring your past. And now we've done a little bit of this, but what we've done up to this point, you've explored your shared past. If you'll think back to like week 1 and 2, really, I had you guys talking a lot about when you met and what you were like when you dated and some of those early stages in your relationship. Tonight's a little bit different. You're exploring your past, but you're specifically exploring your individual past. And you're going to be looking at how that helped mold you and shape you into the kind of husband and the kind of wife that you became. And we're going to do this tonight, and we're going to do this next week. I want you to see over the course of the next few weeks that there is a very straight line that can be drawn from who you are to who you were. It is really common for me to sit in my office with a couple and listen to what's going on. So first thing I want to do is hear kind of where they're at, what brought them to my office in the first place. And usually right after that, we'll start talking about where they came from. Tell me about your family. Tell me about your experiences as a kid. What do you remember about growing up? And when you put those two conversations side by side, here's what we're struggling with, here's where I came from, it's amazing how clear those lines become. We pick up really bad habits that create very weird expectations. Things like, for example, a daughter. So imagine for a minute a daughter who has a lot of adult responsibilities placed on her at a young age. A daughter who cares for younger siblings. A daughter whose job it is to make dinner sometimes for the family. A daughter whose job it is to do things that maybe are above the pay grade of a 12-year-old girl. And I'm saying that because I know I'm probably telling someone's story in this room. What you're going to naturally assume you're going to get from that daughter is, as an adult, you're going to get a pretty high anxiety daughter. You're going to get a mother who is very hypersensitive to ensuring that every little detail is taken care of. They're going to have a tendency to be very introspective and be very hard on themselves. They're going to really struggle to view their accomplishments and have pride in themselves as a mother because of those things that were placed on them at a young age. A son whose dad was emotionally distant, which I realize is the most therapeutically stereotypical thing I can say, is the athletic son whose dad just won't tell him he loves him. But you can expect with a son whose dad is emotionally distant, you can expect a son who struggles with his temper. And you can expect a son who struggles with his behavior a lot of times. So tonight, we are going to explore your foo. We're going to talk really extensively about your family of origin. I want to show you a couple of pictures. This is your family of origin. Now, I want you to notice something about these people. They're pretty well put together. They're all ready to go. They're all very attractive people and ready to take on the world in their retirement age. But you'll notice something else about them. They all have baggage. Now, it's nice baggage. It's cute baggage, it matches, it's baggage, but they do have baggage. Guess what happens to you as a kid? One of these days, your family's going to just start handing you that baggage. And you get to take that baggage, and eventually you look up one day, and this is what your life looks like. Baggage. You are full of baggage. I want to encourage you tonight. Baggage is not a bad thing. This baggage that I'm describing is not indicative of an unhealthy person. It's indicative of a person with a history. When April and I first got married, one of the things we struggled with the most was, like a lot of couples, we struggled with fighting. Now, not frequency. We didn't fight a lot, but when we fought, man, it was like a Rubik's Cube trying to figure out how to get to the end of that fight. And it wasn't until a lot of conversations about our past that we began to realize, okay, her coming from a family of farmers in West Texas is different than me coming from a family of preachers. They handle things in weirdly different ways. So my farmer wife came from a family that didn't talk a lot about what was bothering them until they got to that breaking point. They were the fight hippos, all of them. It's a family of fight hippos. And they would wait until things got really bad, and then they would snap, and then they would retreat. And then here was the crazy part. Nobody ever said anything. Like, that was just the end of it. And then the next day, they'd get up, and everybody's fine, and we're cooking breakfast. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. You said horrible things to each other like 6 hours ago. What's happening? And to me, that was very weird and bizarre. To my wife, that was very normal and fine. So when she brought that into our marriage, I was mortified. My sensitive self was unprepared for that. I came from a family of preachers. My dad was a preacher. Both of my grandfathers were preachers. And my mom was an elementary school teacher. Oh, the lectures. Don't anybody ever talk to me about being lectured. I sat through 4 or 5 sermons a night sometimes. And I would sit and I would take it all in. And every conversation, so if I did something even small, I would hear about how this all started in kindergarten. I knew it. There was that day that you said this thing, and it made me think that eventually you might be prone to doing something like that. And I think, whoa, what's going on? So we had this really overly involved, overly conversational type of conflict, whereas my wife had farmer-style conflict. That's a problem in a marriage because I had a tendency to point things out when they bothered me, and then I would talk them to death, whereas my wife just wanted to punch me in the face and move on. Fortunately, that did not happen often. What we found out, though, was that over time, we began to unpack that baggage. And it was fine to have that baggage, but we began to unpack that baggage. And when we unpacked that baggage, we realized there's a middle ground now. I have my own set of luggage. She has her own set of luggage, but we get to decide what that luggage looks like. And we get to decide what we show our kids. So we worked really hard to try to create that. I want to tell you some things that are in these bags, okay? These are some things in your bags. How you define and show affection. Family pride, anger, fear, sadness. Those are all things we're going to explore. Those are all hiding in your bags. Your work ethic. How you define success is probably in these bags. And they came from your life at a young age. How you maintain your home. How you maintain your home. What you consider clean versus not clean. How often you scrub toilets. It probably came from one of these bags. What the holidays should look like. Another one of my favorite arguments with my wife. I did not understand why she had this very weird inclination when our son was born, weird to me, to want Christmas morning to be just our family. To me, that was a foreign concept. I spent holidays, Christmases as a kid with my extended family all staying together in the house. She did not. And the difference was she grew up in the same town with all of her family. So they would do Christmas morning all in there with their individual family, and then they'd all meet later in the day. My family was all spread out over multiple states. So when she said, well, no, I want to be home with our kids and then we can go see family, that was very weird to me. That took a while to work out, but that came from the baggage. How you spend your free time, what you choose to interpret as downtime comes from these baggage. How you interpret nonverbal communication is in these bags. So when you look at your spouse, the way they cross their legs, the way they sit in a chair, the nonverbal noises that they make, some of it is based on your experience with your spouse, don't get me wrong, but a lot of that starts in these bags. Okay? How you measure love. Measure love. How you measure love comes from these bags. And when I think about measuring love, I think about Jacob because he told me a story that made me laugh. Jacob it was his daughter's doll. It was Ellie's doll, right? It was Ellie's doll. And she thought Asher dropped it in the diaper bin. And so Jacob, as every good father on earth would do, he went dumpster diving in a dirty diaper bin. And it made me, first of all, the doll was in his office, which you should probably know that in advance. The doll was in his office, but he was still arm deep down in the dirty diaper bin. And what made me laugh about that was I was thinking, that's like a measuring stick for how much we love people. Like, man, I love you wrist deep. But that's it. With Ellie, he loves Ellie shoulder deep, so he was all the way down in there. But if it were me, I'd be like, man, you like knuckle. If I'm past the knuckle, I'm out. So how you measure love can often be found in these bags. But I want to say something about these bags. They're not all bad. Some of your bags look like this. Some of you got some beautiful, wonderful things from your family. You may have gotten your faith from your family. You may have been given a picture of what a healthy family is supposed to look like. When I say baggage, we think bad, put your baggage down. Baggage is not bad. It just means you've been places. And it means you have a family who is willing to hand you stuff. So I want to get rid of the idea that baggage is a bad thing. These things can be treasures. They can also be wisdom. They can be very deep, meaningful moments with your family that give you insight as to how you're supposed to live a happy, healthy life. So the idea that we're going to explore your past, we're not going to just explore the bad stuff. I want to show you something else. This picture to me is really powerful, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why this picture is really powerful. You may have seen this picture online. It's a forest outside of Seattle. Somebody chained a bike to a tree in like the 50s. There's a story that it was like a kid that went off to war. That's not actually true. Somebody just chained a bike to a tree and left it. The bike stayed attached to this tree, and the tree began to grow. And over the course of years and decades, this was in the 50s, and this picture was taken just a few years ago. Over the course of decades, you see what happened. Something I want you to notice about this tree. This tree still fulfilled God's purpose for it. It still became the tree that it was supposed to become. It just kind of enveloped that thing that had been set up against it a long time ago. The bike did not prevent the tree from growing, and it didn't stop the tree from becoming everything that the tree was meant to be, but to separate the bike from the tree would now be impossible without killing the tree. Okay, you can shave some stuff off, but the internal parts of that bike are going to be in that tree, and the only way to get that bike out is to kill the tree. For you, I want you to think of your baggage like this bike. It was set against you a long time ago, but you kept growing, and you kept becoming what it was God wanted you to be. And if you think about your past and you think, well, yeah, you don't understand, my past was really damaged, and what I saw as a kid was really messed up. It was way worse than a bike. Okay, I'll do you one better. Even if it's a car, God can still grow that tree. And that car may be a part of it, but God can still grow that tree, and you can still become all the things that you want to become, and you can still fulfill your purpose. Tonight is not about shedding horrible moments of your past. If some of that comes out, that's fine, but that's not what tonight's about. Tonight is about exploring where you came from so that you have an idea where you're going and what your family is going to look like. Now, I promised last week I'm going to talk actually weirdly very little tonight, and I'm almost done, so let's go ahead and turn to page 2. Tonight is going to be yours, and next week is going to be yours as well. I am going to talk a little bit. I'm going to kind of guide the conversation, but I really want tonight, I want you to spend a lot of time in conversation with each other. If your spouse is unable to be here tonight, I hate that, and I wish that everybody had their partner here with them, but I appreciate you being here. In this time, I want you thinking about the answers to these questions. I want you, if in an office environment, what I prefer is, before we talk about these questions, I prefer you write down the answers, because I want you to actually think through them. So if your spouse isn't here, think through each one of these questions and actually jot down answers. Jot down notes that you might be willing to think about. All right. Here's what's on page 2. I'm going to start you off with 2 very simple topics, faith and family functioning. All right, here's why we're starting with these 2. Because the next 5 conversations are all going to be about your emotional experience, and I'm going to quiz you to see whether you're healthy or unhealthy. I know you love it when I do that. But I don't want to quiz you over, 1, your faith, because that's not really something that would, A, be appropriate to quiz, and B, I don't think it would really even be possible. So we're not going to do a quiz on that. And also family functioning, there's no quiz for that. There's just an explanation for where you came from. So here's what I want you to do. I'm going to give you probably about 10 minutes, and I'm going to give you a 2-minute warning when it's almost time. I want you to read through these questions. I want to tell you what I need from you. I need you to pay attention to the first part of the question. Okay, here's how I write these questions. I write the first question. That's what I need answered. So number 1, as a child, was your house usually neat or messy? Have fun with that one. That's the one I'm most interested in. The next couple questions are in case you need more information to give or you're struggling to answer the questions. So I don't want you to look at this. If you are one of my very concrete thinkers, who is one of those AP kids who wants to know exactly how to do the instructions, I don't need you to go through and say, okay, we did this first part. Now, who cleaned what? Okay, now, how does that compare with influence my home as an adult? I don't need you to go through point by point each one of these. But I do want you to be thinking that these are the types of things I want you talking about. Now, if you go in a slightly different direction, that's A-okay. But the main thing I'm looking for is, number 1, did you answer the question? And number 2, did you relate that question to your current state of being? Okay, that's really what I'm interested in. Now, before I turn you loose, I want to show you a couple of things quickly. First of all, I want you to remember, go back to week 1, and I want you to think about talking and listening. I realize that when I give you like a 10-minute window to talk in, it'd be easy to get up and run to the restroom, go check on the kids. I get that you, as much as you may want to do this stuff at home, it's the start of school, and asking you to go home and have an hour-long conversation tonight is going to be an awful tall order. And I know that because my wife and I have struggled to do these things at home. I'm going to try to give you time to do this tonight, but here's what I'm asking. While we're doing this, stay with your spouse. Stay completely connected to your spouse. Give them 10 minutes where you're not distracted, where you keep the phone in your pocket, where you don't worry about stepping out for anything. Stay connected to your spouse. So remember talking and listening. And I want to say one other thing to you veterans. Okay? So some of you people who've been married a few years, you look at each other and think, well, I already know your past. I know all your stuff. I've met your weird cousin that only shows up every now and then. You know all these things about each other. Let me tell you what I've noticed about you in sessions. First of all, your opinions of the spouse, by and large, they're rooted in your own experiences. So for example, I perceive my father-in-law to be what I have perceived him to be for the previous 12 years of my life, because that's how long I've been in the family. The stories that I hear from my wife about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I struggle to conceptualize who that person was, because I never met that guy. Does that make sense? You've been married 50 years. Most of your opinions about his family is not rooted in his experience. They're rooted in yours. You see what I'm saying? Here's what I'm looking for. Today, I don't care about objective truth. So if he says, well, you know, as a kid, my mom really struggled to show love to me. Your answer to that is, that's not true. I know your mom. She's super loving and super kind. The goal here is not to explore objective truth. The goal is to explore your partner's reality. So whatever they perceive the past to be, that's what we're looking at. This is all we're doing tonight. We're going to unpack your baggage. And again, that does not mean something negative. Now take a look at page 2. I'm going to give you, like I said, about 10 minutes. I'll give you a 2-minute warning, and then I got at least one other thing I want us to try to get done tonight. You may begin this activity. Okay, if you didn't get through that little assignment, that's great, because that means you were talking. So keep it up when we leave here. But I want, in the interest of time, I want to make sure we've had a chance to do the last part of tonight, because what we're going to do now is actually going to be exclusively what we do next week, just in a bunch of different areas. So I'm going to walk you through the activity now so we don't have to take a lot of time next week explaining it. Go ahead and flip over to page 3. Here is your quiz for tonight. You are going to, tonight, now I want to point out a typo that drove me insane, and I didn't notice it until after it was printed off. Number 1, for some reason, is number 4. I don't know why that is, but it's hard to look at. My OCD, Ryan, takes over, and I promise you, I came that close to putting them back on the printer and running another 200 copies, but I didn't want Nita to yell at me. So change number 4 to number 1, and you'll be with me. Here is your job. Your job is to go through page 3. There are 9 questions, so I'm only going to give you about a minute to do that. There is a Likert scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. You are going to strongly agree to strongly disagree to each one of these questions. When you get to the bottom, you will notice score for items 1 through 9. You will also notice a scoring guide on top. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. This scoring guide is the most complicated scoring guide we're going to have in this little session, because it goes from 2 to -2. So now we're into negative integers. So we're building on math as well as on family functioning, see? You're getting all kinds of stuff. So here's what I want you to do. Strongly agree is worth 2 points. Agree is 1. Neutral is 0. Disagree is -1. And strongly disagree is -2. You're going to give me a total for items 1 through 9. Okay? That's pretty self-explanatory, but if you don't understand it, just ask your wife and she'll explain it. All right, here's your number. Because as always, I know you're interested to see if you pass or not. The number we are looking for is 5. The number is 5. If you scored above a 5, here's what that tells me. Let me explain what that means. If your final came to a 5 or above, what that tells me is in your past, and specifically in your family of origin, you guys probably did a pretty good job of expressing emotions such as pride, and pride in your accomplishments, and feeling as though what you've done is acceptable. And you probably had parents who told you from time to time that they were proud of you, and made you feel as though you were special and you were unique. If you scored below a 5, that may not have been a strong suit for your family. Now, it doesn't mean that they were cold and distant. It just means that this may not have been part of your normal routine. It may not have been part of your normal dialogue. Now, here's the reason we're talking about this. We're talking about this because we have a tendency in our culture, and really just in our minds, for whatever reason, we have a tendency to focus on the negative moments in our day. Here's the crazy thing, and I think everybody in this room can relate to this. You'll go an entire day, 99% of your interactions will either be positive or completely neutral. What's the one you're going to remember? That look you got. The thing that person said. That's the one thing that you're going to grab onto, and it's going to ruin and wreck your day. I read this, and I've heard this before, but I read it recently. If you imagine having $86,000 in the bank, and somebody took $10 out of your pocket and took off running, how upset would you be? If the answer is I have $86,000 of money sitting there and someone takes $10 out of it, how much of my life am I going to spend worrying about that $10? The reason that's a good analogy is because there are 86,000 seconds in your day, and someone who takes 10 seconds of them, how much of your time are you going to give to them now? Because they robbed you of 10 of your 86,000 seconds. Make sense? All right, I say that because pride and accomplishment is important for us to be able to wrap our brains around. Here's what I want you to do. Flip over to the last page. Now, we are not going to get to the love and affection section tonight, but we are going to get to the discussion questions for pride and accomplishment. Here's what I want. There are 3 questions. I want you and your spouse to each have an opportunity to answer them. Yes, you can answer these questions with a short sentence or two. I want to encourage you to dig a little deeper. As I told you just a few minutes ago, I understand that it's a busy, busy time of year. Now, if you and your spouse are in a situation where you are actually going home, making a pot of tea, and sitting over it and getting deep into these conversations, you are an honor student, and God bless you for it. But most of us go home and are trying to fumble to get the kids in bed and then get everybody out the door in the morning. As a result, this 10 minutes that we have may be your one opportunity to have this conversation in an effective way. So same rules apply. You do not have to go point by point through these questions, but I do want you to read the entire question and think about what you can pull out of it that you can share with your spouse. All right, just like last time, I'll give you a 2-minute warning. We don't have quite a full 10 minutes, but it's only 3 questions, so do the best you can with it. You can go. All right, with just our few minutes we've got left, I want to shed a light on something. The conversation you're having, the depth of conversation that you're having is important. The purpose of this is not to just get information. The purpose is not to just understand a little more about your partner, although that's great. Hopefully you got something in here you didn't already know, but that's not really the purpose in what we're doing. What we're doing here is we're trying to create for you a bit of a map for what your spouse experiences and the world that they came from and the experiences they had as a kid, because all of those experiences genuinely do affect them in their current life. Now, that doesn't mean, and I want to make sure you hear me say this, it does not mean that what you saw as a kid you are going to repeat as an adult. That's not what I mean. What I mean is, the goal is that you take the good stuff from your childhood and you enhance it and make it better, and you try to leave the bad stuff behind. That's the goal. But even by leaving it behind, you're still making choices based on what you saw as a kid. Does that make sense? So whether you accept it or you reject it, it doesn't matter. It's all coming from the same frame of reference with it, which is the experiences you had as a kid. They really matter. If you struggled with confidence at 14, especially if you're a female, the odds are you're going to struggle with confidence most of your life. If you struggled with self-esteem issues, if you struggled with pride, if you struggled with decision-making, if you struggled with a lot of these things as a kid, odds are you're going to struggle with them as an adult. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be true for you, and it definitely doesn't have to be a life sentence. But I do want you to understand your tree is growing, and those experiences are just a part of that process. All right? The last thing I want to tell you is this. We have a tendency to avoid this conversation. We have a tendency to avoid the tell me about your childhood. And in fact, with most men, there's a reason that we took 6 weeks to get here. When I do marriage counseling, most men really push back on that conversation. Don't tell you about my parents growing up. They didn't hug me enough. That's not why I'm here. I get it, and I get that it's a weird conversation to have. But the reality is, I wanted, as a man, true story, I did not want to explore your past when I did marriage counseling. And early in my career, I tried not to do it, but I couldn't. Because as much as I wanted to just focus on the here and now and what you're struggling with right this moment, when you're working with a marriage and you can see these really obvious lines that come from their past and where they came from, you'd be doing your clients a disservice to not go through it and to not talk about it. So I promise you, I wanted to do man therapy where we didn't talk a lot about your past and you didn't have to lay on the couch and talk about your dad. Unfortunately, that stuff's actually weirdly important. So understand that's why we're talking about this. It is not about hindering your growth. Again, observe the tree. The tree continued to grow. You do not have to be hindered by your past, but you can really help your spouse out if they understand what's on this piece of paper. Spouse, if this is not your normal type of conversation, I want you to dig in really deep and have this conversation anyway. And the purpose for it is to ensure that you have that map for your partner. Next week, we're going to continue this conversation. So next week, we're going to talk in greater detail about this. We're going to do the love and affection section, but we're actually going to go, there's 4 more after that. We're going to go really deep into your experiences and really deep into your life. I told you at the beginning that this was the most important section. And when I mean that, or when I say that, what I mean is these 4 weeks, really these 3 weeks. We're talking about your past, where you came from, how it affects you in the present, and then we're taking all of the things we've done up to this point, and we're going to zero in on how to make sure that your faith is the foundation for all of it. That's what's coming over the next 3 weeks. So I'm going to remind you again what I said at the very beginning. I know we're stretching this thing out, and I appreciate your diligence. I know it is an incredibly busy time of year, but if it is at all possible, I truly think you'll benefit from these next 3 weeks if you can commit to being here. When you go home tonight, I'm not going to give you a homework assignment because, again, I know it is a busy time of year, but if you got into these conversations and didn't get them finished, I'd encourage you to try and find a time to zero in on your spouse and finish those conversations. Let's finish with a word of prayer, and then we'll be done. Father, I come to you now thanking you more than anything else for the opportunity that you give us to be here and to focus on you and to focus on each other. God, I thank you for a room full of people who, despite it being an incredibly busy time of year and the weather changing and everything that could pull us out of these doors exists to pull us out of these doors, God, I'm thankful that we have a room full of people who want to be here and a room full of people who are willing to focus in on each other and focus in on you. God, I pray that that commitment that they've made will pay dividends. And I pray very specifically, God, I pray for the marriages in this room that when they leave here, that they'll be happier than they were when they got here. And God, I pray that that's because of the spirit that you put in them and the wisdom and the strength that you've breathed into their marriage through their connecting with each other. God, I ask these things through your Son. Amen. Have a great week, and I will see you next week.